All right. Good evening, friends. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the beautiful Rio Tinto Center, the Natural History Museum of Utah. My name is Jason Cryan. I'm proud and honored to be the executive director of this amazing place. Welcome here for you here in the room with us, and also those who are joining us online. It's great to have you with us. As you know, the mission of this museum is to illuminate the natural world and the place of humans within it. And so I'm excited that you're joining us tonight to find both illumination and inspiration in tonight's speaker. Before we do that, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that our museum stands on land named for the Ute tribe. And this is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, the Paiute, the Goshute, and the Ute tribes. The University of Utah and the museum both recognize and respect the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We also respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, the states, and the federal government. We affirm our commitment to the partnership with the Native nations and the urban Indian communities through research, through education, and through community outreach activities. So our annual lecture series is possible only with the generous support of the museum's sponsors and partners, who I'd like to recognize now. And so if you just kind of hold your applause, we'll recognize this beautiful long list of our friends together at the end. So we were particularly grateful for our founding underwriter, the R. Harold Burton Foundation, our underwriter, the Cultural Vision Fund, both for their tremendous and ongoing support of this series. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors, the Rio Tinto Kennecott and the M. Lazy M Foundation. Our silver sponsors, the 9990 Group and Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, the DiFiore Family Foundation, Paula Swanner Sargetakis and Joseph Sargetakis of Frogbench Farms, Andrea and Paul Matlin, the Nature Conservancy, and the Wolf Clark Foundation. We're also very grateful to our community partners, the County Library and Veridian Event Center, the Kingsbury Hall, and Liberty Heights Fresh. And finally, many, many thanks to the voters of Salt Lake County. Their approval of the Zoo Arts and Parks Fund, the ZAP Fund, provides invaluable support for this program and other wonderful programs that we offer here and across the county. So, with that list, please join me in thanking such wonderful sponsors. Thank you. And now, let's get right to it. So as you've heard me say before, here at the Natural History Museum of Utah, we believe that life should be colorful. The incredible natural and cultural diversity all around us forms the mosaic of our planet, and we're celebrating that amazing spectrum with both our special exhibit, the new special exhibit, Nature of Color, right upstairs. If you haven't seen it, it's here until August. It's amazing. And we're also celebrating the spectrum of color and diversity with this lecture series, inspired by the theme of color. And in this year's lecture series, we're engaging with outstanding individuals representing very diverse fields, people whose work impacts the human condition in both vibrant and colorful ways. So I hope that you're going to join us for the rest of the lecture series. On April 14th, we have Bren Smith, who will be joining us virtually online. Bren is a restorative ocean farmer. He's the co-founder of Greenway and the author of Eat Like a Fish. And he'll be speaking about sustainable ocean farming, examining the relationship between agriculture and climate, and discussing how he bridges land agriculture and sea farming to create a new model that brings both high yield and low impact. So that'll be exciting. And then the final speaker in our series is Pearl Sandick, who is a professor here at the University of Utah. And she'll be speaking twice, both on Wednesday, April 27th at the Veridian Center, and on Thursday, April 28th, right here at NHMU. Dr. Sandick is an astronomer and theoretical particle physicist. It's even hard to say that. And she's going to help us expand our thinking to the extraterrestrial by introducing us to dark matter, which is the mysterious substance that holds the universe together, and yet, after decades of study, remains quite a mystery. So I hope that you're going to join us for those exciting evenings. But tonight, we're thrilled to have our second speaker in the series, Miss Majora Carter. Majora is a MacArthur Fellow and a Genius Grant recipient. She's a Peabody Award-winning broadcaster who's inspired vision and she's over there smiling at me, and fierce persistence led to the transformation of the South Bronx waterfront with innovative green space. Majora is a lecturer at Princeton University's Keller Center and serves as the editor and senior producer at Ground Truth, which is a platform for stories of people building community power. With degrees earned at Wesleyan University and New York University, plus 8 honorary doctorates and notable awards like being named by Goldman Sachs as one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs, Majora has a long and admirable list of professional ventures to her name, but also related mostly to the sustainable economic development, tech job creation, and talent retention in diverse communities. Majora's new book, Reclaiming Your Community, addresses strategies to slow down the brain drain that plagues and challenges economic progress of low-income communities. And this evening, Majora will speak about urban revitalization and her campaign to green the ghetto. So please help me welcome Majora Carter.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be here, and it is a beautiful space, and I'm just sort of flipping out at looking out the mountains, and that you guys get to experience this like all the time. But you know, today is also, it's April 4th, and it's the 58th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination today. So, you know, on today, this day of the year, I'm always kind of like moved even more so to think about the kind of work that I do, and just really just feel like this is why, you know, we're working to reclaim our communities in ways that actually, you know, sort of speak volumes to what we can actually do as a country and as a society, and to move forward, because obviously we've still got a long way to go, but we can get there. I'm absolutely convinced. Like, so much I wrote a book about it. But seriously, but I want to talk to you a little bit about like the book and like the process that got me there, and looking forward to like a bunch of different, you know, talking with you more about what's all on your mind. So, but let's just start. So it's a talent retention strategy that I actually use for community development. And you know, successful companies, they don't invest in in their talent so that they give it away, you know, to their competitors. They keep their people motivated to grow with the company and inspire those around them to lean in with them. So I believe that talent retention, the same tool that's used to grow successful companies, can also be used to build great neighborhoods for the people born and raised in them. My hometown is the South Bronx in New York City, and it's the kind of neighborhood that one might say had a talent repulsion strategy attached to it. It's true. Back in the 1980s, you know, I walked by this crack house on my way to the subway that took me to my high school, one of the best in the country, the Bronx High School of Science. And neighborhoods like mine were places where inequality is assumed by those who live there, both inside the community and those on the outside looking in. So these were the places where the schools, public health, air and water, parks and trees, food options and career opportunities were worse than other parts of the same town. Government subsidized rental housing, health clinics, homeless shelters, liquor stores, dollar stores predominate and dot the landscape. No banks, but plenty of check cashing stores or pawn shops that charge you to actually use your own money. I refer to these communities as low status. I don't call them poor or underprivileged, because status actually implies something, you know, deeper and larger at work. That inequality is actually a well-established fact. You know, think of the communities like that near you. They're everywhere. They're inner cities. They're reservations. They're, you know, all white, you know, former Rust Belt towns. They're all over the world. You know, bright kids who grow up in low-status communities are led to believe they need to measure success by how far they get away from their communities. And I was one of those kids. You know, now I'm a real estate developer and strategy consultant. But I work nationally, but the South Bronx is my research and development lab. for restorative community development. That place that was once a crack house is now my award-winning hip-hop cafe called the Boogie Down Grind, and it's 2 blocks away from the house I grew up in and literally around the corner from my current home. So I've embraced my inner capitalist and my, inner libertarian and my inner socialist and all those other ism and ians that are out there. But my book seems to focus on the sort of the concepts in capitalism, and I believe that the spirit behind its application determines its outcomes. So U.S. capitalism supported both slavery and Black Wall Streets. Those communities of Black folks, all formerly enslaved or even just one generation out of it, where they built thriving businesses and wealth. Black Wall Streets were burned down and looted, murdered and raped by white mobs, savagely and without consequence. Now, was that capitalism? Was that capitalism's fault? Or was it some kind of white cultural distinction that remains unaddressed? I know some people don't like hearing it, but imagine what it feels like to experience it. The U.S. actually has used a talent retention strategy since it started in 1619. Slavery provided white Americans all the benefits of that very barbaric and predatory institution, while Black Wall Streets were built on the sustainable ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and property ownership. Same system, very different outcomes. So Citigroup estimates the racial wealth gap actually costs the U.S. $16 trillion in just the last 20 years alone. Now let's just think for a moment about the money that could have made it into the economy, but didn't because of systemic racism that defined who benefited from America's growth. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. If we wanted to make America as good as its promise, then we should apply the same tools of capitalism that created white wealth in America to create wealth in all of American low-status communities. Real estate development in low-status communities in the U.S. takes the form of one of 2 paths. One's poverty maintenance, wherein you'll see the concentration of things like government-subsidized affordable rental housing, health clinics and pharmacies, philanthropic and government dollars pour into those communities, and the nonprofit industrial complex tends to sort of see poverty as sort of a authentic, cultural attribute of the area, and therefore you'll see, lots of programs that are designed to manage poverty, but they kind of stay the same. They don't get better. Money is made from all this, but not for local people. The other type of that development is gentrification and displacement. So when urban populations grow, even some politicians and even residents will resist density. So you have rising demand and limited supplies, and prices will go up. Now, gentrification generally means, that there's outsiders coming in to change a community to meet their own needs and desires, not the desires of those that are already there. Not that they're always mutually exclusive. Indeed, people in low-status communities want nice things too. As a matter of fact, they leave the communities when they can in order to experience them. So capitalism can fuel gentrification and displacement or poverty maintenance, but neither of those strategies actually help the people that are already there live in the kind of communities that we all deserve to live in. But what if we actually looked at low-status communities as though they were struggling companies? How could we turn them around? How would a talent retention model work for neighborhoods? So municipalities sort of hand out corporate retention packages because they believe that the benefit of having economic activity is worth the price of the subsidy. We'll need to do that in low-status communities that were led to believe that people should measure success by how far they get away from them too. We can't force them to stay, but we can nudge them with lifestyle infrastructure, the type of places that our survey data told us they're seeking. Places like cafes and bars and restaurants, farmers markets and bookstores. They build positive community interactions, and besides, they make people feel really cool to have them around. So another nudge would be real access to property ownership and business ownership that keeps people vested in their neighborhoods. These are like benefits and company stock options. When the community does well, so do the residents, just like the employees of a hot startup. So how do we make those benefits and stock options, get in the right hands and appreciate and value for them? In the US, if you're accused of a crime and can't afford legal counsel, a public defender will be assigned to you. The same can be done for local property owners in low-status communities. Before a real estate transaction goes down within a low-status community, the seller should receive quality legal and financial counsel so they fully understand the value of their land and how to maximize it through sensible refinancing to do things like building rentable vertical additions and accessory dwelling units, or using the value to send their kids to college or even start a business. Maybe these property owners could even be classified by the Securities and Exchange Commission as a protected class, because it is common for people who own property, in low-status communities to be approached with very quick cash offers. And those can be really enticing, for people who have been led to believe there's never any value in their community, so they're sitting on nothing. It's all legal. And real estate and private equity firms have done a really effective job of increasing wealth inequality in this country by separating financially unsavvy people from potential wealth-creating opportunities. So the SEC recently proposed new rules requiring businesses to report their greenhouse gas emissions in an effort to increase transparency or for the risks for investors. Maybe they should do that for taxpayers too. We know real estate and private equity firms can engage in predatory practices at the expense of taxpayers by privatizing the profits and socializing the costs. By increasing fewer homeowners and more landless renters as a business model, they statistically exacerbate poverty's ill effects, including higher rates of bad policing and incarceration and lower health and educational outcomes. Their methods shut aspiring homeowners out of the American dream. It comes at a cost to all of us, so it should come at a far greater cost for those who do business like that. Another issue is that some renters pay more in rent than they would on a mortgage, but most of us who need mortgages cannot compete with the speed at which predatory buyers show up with all-cash deals. A possible solution is for philanthropic organizations to buy properties at market value for those who choose to sell and hold them so that folks within those same communities could have the time to get financing and buy them. That's a valuable cushion of time. At least it gives people a chance, and it's a low risk to park some capital. So this is how we can use a restorative economic approach to capitalism. It's still capitalism, but with rules and practices that favor the outcomes we need as a nation. And there are definitely some folks on the ground, these are some policy measures that I like seeing happen, but there's definitely, some folks on the ground that are doing this thing right now. So this is June Lankard, who is from the Eyak tribe up in Alaska, and he's securing the livelihoods for aspiring, Native youth and women through kelp farming in ancestral native waters. So kelp is a traditional food source and has important commercial applications in pharmaceuticals and cosmetics and bioplastics. In food, you can even, it's an additive in cow feed that actually reduces methane by a ridiculous amount. So it can actually, and also sequesters carbon. I mean, it really is kind of like a miracle thing. So he's competing against multinational companies who literally want to own this emerging ocean industry. And he's trying to actually build, the kind of native-owned industry to actually support native lands up there, which is amazing. So like I mentioned before, I'm from a place that actually felt like it had like a talent repulsion strategy kind of built into it. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s, and that was the era of the burning Bronx. It's like my neighborhood was literally the poster child for urban blight, because there was so much financial disinvestment all over the country, but in particular, in the South Bronx, where, landlords were literally torching their own buildings because of years of redlining, highway construction, all the kind of things that just basically made the land that we were in just not attractive for any reason, and the financial disinvestment just made it even worse. So landlords were torching their buildings to collect insurance money, and so we lost like 60% of the population during that time period. And there was, there were still highways of the tail end of the highway construction boom that happened. So when my family moved to the community back in the 1940s, it was actually sort of like a split, a mixed neighborhood with, residential on one side and light industry on the other. So it was a walk-to-work community. By the time I was born in the late 60s, most of it had actually moved either to right-to-work states or overseas. And what took the place in that industrial area were a lot of these types of waste facilities. And so, so again, feeling like this is all that's there, it was the kind of thing that made people feel like, no, I'm ready to go. And again, being one of those bright kids, led to believe you measure success by how far you get away from it, I absolutely use education to get out. And I only came back home because I was going to NYU and needed a cheap place to stay, which was mommy and daddy's house, period. And, and it was but again, it was just like such a blessing, because at the time I came back, that's when, even though it felt like a defeat, it was like I learned that the city and state were planning on building a huge waste facility on our waterfront. And so the real blessing came in because I did have this education and this distance, I was able to actually see what was going on. I knew that because we were a poor community of color and thus politically vulnerable, that's why the city felt like they could build yet another huge waste facility on top of all the ones and on top of all the other burdensome, noxious facilities we were already experiencing. And so that's when, so I could pretend that I didn't see it. And again, no one would have blamed me. I mean, I was one of the bright kids, right? The one that's gonna grow up and be somebody. And so, but it just felt like I can't. And so I wanted to be a part of the solution. So I worked, in addition to working to help advocate for a more sustainable solid waste management plan, the other tactic that we took was thinking about, well, we know what we're fighting against, but what are we fighting for in the community that we're in? And that's when it got really interesting, because at the time I got a little small, found out, through a group that was working, to work with the U.S. Forest Service called Partnerships for Parks. And, they were hosting this thing where they were offering small grants to folks that were working around the country to support threatened rivers, urban rivers. And I was just like, okay. And so we found out about this grant program, and we were able to get a small grant, to help us, to recreate some opportunities for restoration along the Bronx River, which was right near my community, which I didn't really know existed because I saw the Bronx River only on the subway map. I mean, I knew it was there, but you couldn't get to it. And had I not had this crazy dog that pulled me into what I thought was a dump, there's no way I would have gone in there. And this is honestly, this was in the era, before there were phones on your camera, so you really had to plan to take pictures and stuff. So this was that sort of dead end street that was a dump that dead ended at the Bronx River after about 6, maybe 7 cleanups. So we ended up, but basically that little $10,000 seed grant that we got, helped to pay for, some tools, some art projects that we did, lunch for folks, that we worked with. And it was just this really wonderful opportunity to kind of see, how the place could evolve, even though it was so weird because no one really thought that this could happen, because most of us, again, the place was literally covered with industry and a dump. So you couldn't even see the water from our community. So when you finally got a chance to see it, it was kind of like, oh, well that's interesting. But since we didn't have, we didn't have a park-going culture in our community, because there weren't parks, and there certainly weren't waterfront parks to go to. So we had to sort of build out the activity that would allow people to sort of see it and go to it. And so we did things like, environmental stewardship programs and boat building projects and things of that nature that really allowed folks to sort of see the water for the first time, even doing canoe rides. And it was just a really awesome, experience to go through and to introduce the community to and introduce myself to. And this is still one of my favorite pictures on the planet, because I don't know if you could notice, but I'm simply posing. And I was, because I'm like, I worked 7 years for this and I'm ready for my close-up, thank you very much. And that's exactly what I was thinking. And it's about time y'all can do the rest of the work, thank you. And they did. And because this was at the groundbreaking for a $3 million, redevelopment, fund to redevelop that park. So wait a second, is Abby Feinstein here yet? Hi! Okay, so Abby and I work together on the Bronx River. Salt Lake City has her now, but thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, anyway, there you go. So you should, she's so awesome if you haven't met her. But anyway, so I'm super excited because that was, this allowed us to go from this dump to this beta version, of a park, to this, which is the Hunts Point Riverside Park, as it exists, or literally days after. It was totally, done up. And yeah, thanks, it was kind of cool. And it really was this amazing kind of beautiful space to be in because, if you see your community on the nightly news, for a good portion of your life is a place where nothing good comes out of, or stays in anyway. And then, you see this beautiful thing in your community and it's yours. It was kind of crazy making, I think, for some folks, because it was just like, is that ours? Do we belong there? And then we realized, yes, we do. We like nice things too in our communities. And so I actually got married there, that as well. And my dog who led me and pulled me into the park was my flower girl, that's Xena, yes. And so it was a really kind of amazing place, not just to get married in, which it really was, but it really just reflected like so beautifully to the community, like what's possible, and what like the kind of things, like we could look forward to something beautiful in our own community. Yes, and we also won a national award for urban excellence in design, and this is Xena with her well-deserved award. But going back to the whole talent retention thing and just wanting to stay there, even though I was led to believe that growing up, that our community was just like not a great place, I was always surrounded by incredible people. And even in like the sort of crazier days of it, it never felt like there was like a lack of love or beautiful people that were doing interesting things. And and to this day, people there are entrepreneurs, they're filmmakers, they're medical professionals, they're daycare providers. The woman on the left in the Cozy with my Rose t-shirt, she owns is the proprietress of the Lit Bar, where she combined her two great loves, wine and books, and created a bookstore wine bar, which is really super cool. It's wildly successful. She's from literally across the Bronx River, from my neighborhood. If any of you are foodies, Marcus Samuelson, one of America's celebrity chefs, likes to come up and hang out, with us every now and then. And for those of you who watched, I think his breakthrough role was in 13 Reasons Why, the Netflix special. He played Tony Romero, but the guy in the bottom picture in the middle is Christian Navarro, who's an actor, and his family. And he was born and raised in Hunts Point as well. But what's interesting is if you ask young people or ask folks, what did they think of our community, and especially those graduating high school and going to college, which is really important because for our community, just over the past 5 or 6 years, we've had, not including COVID that time, unfortunately, but before that, we had more kids graduating and going to college than we had for the past 30 years. And so we were really proud of that as a community. And so we would ask these students, because as a developer, we wanted to know what were people's hopes and dreams and aspirations for their own community as we planned out the projects that we wanted to do. And they would say things like, well, the neighborhood needs now, they need more homeless shelters and more affordable housing for really poor people, more health clinics, because everybody here is sick with diabetes or in obesity or heart conditions. And, just things like that. My other favorite one was they needed things like programs for the kids, which was really cute. It's like they're not much older than the kids. But anyway, it was like, okay, we just dutifully wrote it down. And but when we asked them, knowing that that they had a bright path ahead of them for them, so what do you plan on doing, with your with your life after you graduate, go to college and and get your great career, and you're going to come back here? And they were like, no, why would I do that? To them, all the things that they mentioned were markers of poverty, the kind of things that they wanted to get at least an arm's length away from. But if you listen to the nonprofit industrial complex, it kind of, what they were responding to were the kind of things that the nonprofit cultural complex would kind of, I think, consider a cultural attribute. That poverty is just that. They would plan for the kind of poverty, quote unquote, alleviating programs in those communities and not much more. Almost as if, poverty is so much part of the culture, it's practically in their DNA. And it's as in asking, is this something worth preserving? So we ask people within our community, is this true? Like, is poverty a cultural attribute? You didn't ask them like that because, that's policy wonk talk. But we'd ask them, so what are you looking for in the community that you desire? Not whether or not it was in the community and coming back to their community or not, but clearly they wrote the things that did not surprise us at all. They wanted the same kind of things that people wanted, in their own, in any community, like cool places to hang out in, be seen in, cafes, bars, restaurants, great parks, even though we do have great parks, housing that matches their income. And they wanted to be inspired by people like them and also possibly, inspire others. And so, but in low status communities, on the poverty level economic maintenance side, at least in our community, the kind of things that you'd find are things like, are there healthy, affordable options for food or different dining options? Or if there are economic developments, are they the kind of places that make you want to spend your money elsewhere? I love a bargain just about as much as anybody else, but if 99 cents or dollar stores are the only real retail opportunity in your communities, after a while it kind of gets a little old. And lots of healthcare clinics, federally subsidized, of course, have a lot of real estate, and so do pharmacies, taking care of the lifestyle related conditions from diabetes and obesity, within the communities. Again, many places to get self-medicated as well. If you want to keep your money and invest it, if banks or credit unions, you're not going to find it. You'll find more places like this. And last but definitely not least, you'll find lots of low-income, affordable housing, federally subsidized. And so before anybody even thinks to say something like, wow, Majora's got this thing against like poor neighborhoods. No, don't. What I do have a thing against is the concentration of poverty. Because when that is planned for, and all of these things that I just showed you are planned for in low status communities, what it does is concentrate the poverty there, which statistically concentrates like all of the issues associated with it. Everything from low educational and health outcomes, higher rates of folks being involved in the justice system. Add to that, bad policing, that they go hand in hand. There's so many opportunities where there's just like a lack of hope that make people feel like, yeah, they do need to measure success by how far they get away from the community. And that's why we think about there's that kind of talent, that kind of real estate development, and the other kind, which is gentrification and displacement. And we don't think that either one of those are like great ways to build in our communities, considering there are so many places like this around the country. Again, whether they're Native American reservations or inner cities, or even Rust Belt towns, where the industry's come and gone. This is the kind of thing where we really do think that you need to see value in our communities, but we're led to believe that there isn't any there. But just because we don't see the value in those communities and why many of us are striving to get out, doesn't mean that others don't. That's when predatory speculators come in. Like this is actually a sign that was up in my community, and we take them down when we see them. It's one thing to be calling people up and like asking, to buy their house for cash, but the really public displays, yeah, I do, we take them down. But this was, when we posted it up on Instagram a while ago, someone wrote back and just said what she has her kids do is actually call, whoever leaves a message, and then tells them to stay away from their inheritance, which I think is hilarious. So again, the talent retention approach that we take, it is a strategy, and it's all about, people feeling like they will want to reinvest emotionally and socially and financially in the communities that they were from. Because why are we always led to believe that we need to take, all of the wonderful things that we have and go enrich somebody else's neighborhood? So again, nudging people to think about looking at their own community as a way I think to repair the social fabric of America, like across, all of the various low status communities around it. But what do you need? You need a high quality built environment, places that are commercially viable year round, that promote community interaction without feeling like a community center that, a lot of people other than kids go to. So then you want quality housing in a range of incomes, including home ownership models that allow people to feel like this is something that they could stay in and grow in. And nobody wants to have poverty conflated, with their cultural identity. Nobody likes that. So again, just recognizing that it's a state of being for people at a time, at a place, and that there are opportunities to move people out of it. So one of the first things that we did, well, actually, one of the first things I really did was actually work to redevelop or to develop and spearhead the development of a park that was a dump. So that was my first talent retention strategy. The second major one in the neighborhood was actually was a cafe. It scored high on the list of things that people wanted to see in the community, and what we did was we realized that we started it off as like a joint venture with a very, the really established specialty coffee shop called Birch Coffee. And then we realized we learned a lot from them and loved them to pieces and learned everything that we could. But then we realized that we kind of had to be more culturally close to our own roots. So we rebranded, ourselves as the Boogie Down Grind. And for those of you who don't know, the South Bronx is the birthplace of hip hop. You're welcome. And we're also called the Boogie Down. So we called ourselves the Boogie Down Grind. And so we lined the walls with images of the seminal, hip hop albums, and used urban archaeology, within the, to put up signs, from that era, which was really kind of cool. And it was a really kind of fascinating thing because even though, we totally knew that in the sort of the realm of gentrifying places, that coffee shops kind of signal, oh, y'all are going to be moved out. But we also knew that, frankly, coffee is the blackest beverage on the planet, and all of us drink it, and we like coffee shops. So I was like, why are we not in the retail part? And so we literally, created a coffee shop because we knew people were leaving to experience stuff like that. So, but there were some folks who were not pleased. And again, and we were, interestingly enough, protested. And it was kind of a crazy kind of space to be in. It's inside the coffee shop and to see banners, huge, outside with your name on it, accusing you of being everything except a child of God. It was just oh, okay, all right, okay. And, but what was fascinating is that what was ironic, actually, was that so there were 10, 15 people outside with big banners and, bullhorns and stuff. And inside the cafe that day, there were 40 people in attendance because we were hosting a workshop for aspiring homeowners and homeowners there, and also for aspiring business owners, because we found resources that had 0% interest 0% interest loans for people in our community. So I was just the irony of all this is just super crazy. And then, but what was also really beautiful is that literally the next day, we had the best day ever in revenues at the cafe. Because the rest of the folks in the neighborhood were just that was weird. This isn't what we know this to be. Because the cafe is 100% locally owned. This woman in the photo was actually our first investor who's from the neighborhood. She's Honduran, her husband's Jamaican, so they've been, immigrants to the community and to the country, and we're just we want to be a part of the change that's happening in our community. And we also did another investment round through another project, a crowdfunding investment thing too. So lots of people actually get revenue from this project, which is great. So this is about actually what makes me super happy. This is for any architecture geeks out here. This is a rail station that was designed by Cass Gilbert, same architect that did the Woolworth Building and the U.S. Supreme Court Building. Actually, he was America's first architect. Again, for architecture geeks, that's a big deal. And but anyway, so he designed these little rail stations in the Bronx, and I just acquired one of them. And the plan was, and it is actually taken out of rail service in the 40s or 30s or so, and then it was split into a little mini storefront. And then once the owner of the ground lease died, I acquired it from Amtrak because it just was it was just left to like rot practically, even though that building's not going to rot. It's got like, steel reinforced walls that are like 12 inches thick. It's amazing. But anyway, we did, the first thing that we did was we got kids from the neighborhood, hired them to actually create their own mural project on it. And, and just to sort of make it look like somebody loved it. But now we're transforming it into, one of those family-friendly places. And it's actually, this rail station is the real reason why I'm even in the neighborhood. My dad was a Pullman porter, and he was a, and so his line was the Hartford, New Haven, New York line that traveled right through this rail station, and there was talk of reopening it. So when back in the 40s, he actually won $15,000 in a horse race out in LA, carried it $15,000 in cash, back home in a satchel. Because it was hard for a black man to get a mortgage back in those days, even harder than it is now. And so carried it home, literally found a seller who was willing to sell to him in a house 2 blocks away from that station. Now, it never reopened, but that's okay, because it really provided like an amazing, life for my family, during times when most of us didn't have it like that. So I thank you, Daddy. But this is what it looks like on the inside when it was originally built. Just really interesting, kind of space. My husband and I actually did the initial demolition ourselves. Fortunately, we actually got other folks to work on it. And so it just passed it's going to show up on the National Register pretty soon, because it actually is an architectural gem. It's not fully redeveloped right now, but we wanted to give people a sneak peek of what it could be. So we're calling it Bronxlandia, and we got, through the Department of Buildings, just a temporary permit to assemble. And we did one day late last year. I don't know what prompted us to do it in December, for God's sake, because we don't even have all the windows in. It was just stupid, but it was amazing. So we did a pop-up shop during the day, or a flea market for people that are older. That's what we used to call it in the day. Local vendors, sell their stuff. It's really cool. It was super fun. And then during the early part of the evening, we had a Malik Yoba, who is a Bronx-born actor. He's still working and just doing some really cool stuff. And now he's also, in addition to being a real estate developer, he's also a producer and director. And he's just done a series about real estate development in New York, in New York City. And I actually happened to be in the first episode. So we did a screening of that in the early part of the evening, which was super awesome. And a bunch of folks that were that were also in the show came out as well. And and then in the evening we had this hip hop. We have two music producers in the community. One does a lot of rock, and the other one does a lot of hip hop. And so we actually combined it, and it was amazing. And so that rounded out the evening, and it was super cool. But now the plan is to transform that rail station and really return it to a bit of its former glory. We're not going full hog down on the true renovations, because then we wouldn't frankly be able to use it for what we wanted to use it for, which is an event hall, mostly for music, which I'm super excited about. But the idea is to just give it another life, to help retain, have more opportunities for people to sort of see value in the community, so we can use it for music performance, weddings, quinceañeras or sweet 16s and stuff like that. And we're also using it as an opportunity, again, to take advantage of Security and Exchange new rules around who can invest in real estate development projects. So now small investors can do that. And so we're absolutely offering, as part of our financing to do the full rehab of the space, local people from the community can actually invest at the same rate of return, as folks who will be going to be getting a bunch of money from. So, but it's super exciting that we're going through that right now. And then lastly, this is a former juvenile detention facility in the community that really, this building is the thing that helped me think about this whole idea of a talent retention strategy, but we needed more space to really think about, mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development, opportunities for home ownership, and just really create the kind of thriving space that would raise the bar for what passed for community development within our communities. When this place finally closed down, it was a bad place. We don't do juvenile justice, in this country very well. And this was it would break children. My dad was actually a janitor there at the latter part of his life. life. And he would just talk about it would break children. And actually, we took in some folks that were able to come out and were partially raised in my house too, which was sort of cool. But again, it's just like some kids were put in there because of the stuff their parents did. Like it was just psychotic. But anyway, I digress. But anyway, it was finally empty, after, children's rights advocates and juvenile justice advocates really worked to close it and try to do something a bit more humane. But the space, 5 acres big. In New York City, that's a lot of space. And so I approached the mayoral administration 2 administrations ago and just said this could be a real site for a transformational approach to real estate development here. And, and use the site as a catalyst for housing, mixed income housing development, including home ownership, manufacturing and education, specifically around the commercial developments, really do economic, analysis to understand where the jobs and business development needs to be. So you bring people into that and then create incredible public space because we know that's the great democratizer. And you do it well, and then it literally adds so much community value to spaces. And then of course commercial and retail, because you want dollars to circulate throughout a local economy, and that speaks to the health of it. And so one of the reasons why I liked even thinking about this is because I also knew that the approach could be applied in particular to post-industrial American cities, that had manufacturing in them. And so the idea was, because we know that the topography of them, there's the residential spot, and then there's the industrial part right next to it, and then there's always that little weird space in between where it's just sort of like a no man's land for zoning and all sorts of other stuff. And so, but we knew in our area, it was the residential was the jail on one side, and on the other side was where industry started, and it was like a truck engine rebuilding spot, a big mostly empty parking lot, some illegal chop shops. But ultimately, this would really what that area was known for is that people would know that truckers would go there to pick up a prostitute, and so it was just like, good uses will drive out bad ones, and if you create, the ground plane to make that kind of stuff happen. So things like, if you've got, light industry that has, 3 shifts. If you've got entrances to schools and housing, and commercial spaces, there's going to be that kind of activity where it just feels better to be out and about at all different times of the day. And so again, we wanted to use this approach, this space, to really prove out a model that you could change of the way a community develops from the inside out, as long as you put in the right infrastructure that allowed it to happen, in the form of the housing and also commercial and developments happening there. And really, again, raise the bar. And so we put together this amazing team. I mean, New York City probably, I'm sure, has never seen, more folks on a real estate development project of this scale that had more women and minority-owned developers involved, as equity partners. It was a really big deal. Sometimes they make us subs or subcontractors on projects this big, but never the leads, and we were all the leads. It was kind of great. And because I value diversity, there were 2 white male-led teams on my thing too, because I value it, and I showed it. Thank you very much. So there you go. But we put together this amazing, proposal. We had 1,200 units of mixed income housing, including about 100 units of low-income home ownership. It would have been the biggest low-income home ownership project in the entire country. And we had about 200,000 square feet reserved specifically for, and part of it for light manufacturing, which we know is one of the biggest job and business developers in the country right now, and probably will be for a while in terms of economic growth trends. And and we were super excited, and it would have brought about 800 permanent jobs to the community. And we were so excited, and we just figured, okay, if we don't win it, somebody that's better than us is going to win it. But unfortunately, our city did what they normally do, which was take on, they basically handed the proposal, or handed the project to 2 all-white male development teams. And they built a low-income housing project with a health clinic and and community centers. And that was it. So it was like, sort of, usual. And so this, closing with some hope, because we have to have it, and I think we have it, and we know it's there. So this is a quote from Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And for those of you that haven't read it, it's really short, you should. But this is my absolute favorite line, because I think it speaks volumes in one sentence about why we really have to push as hard as we do. Because I don't think that, that a talent retention that is going to solve all the problems associated with either poverty maintenance or gentrification displacement, or solve all the problems associated with capitalism. But I don't think we're going to solve any of them without talent retention. Because I don't think we need to be building, keep building and rebuilding the monuments, to the shameful practices that created the disparities that low status communities have right now. Because if we use the tools of capitalism that we have in a restorative way, people in low status communities won't have to move out of their neighborhoods to live in a better one. And thank you.
All right, thank you very, very much. So we have some time for you to interact with Majora, and we have our two elves here, Paul Michael and Scott, I think, are going to be running microphones out to you. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. They'll come to you, and we will we'll see how long we can go. We have the online portion of tonight is being streamed on YouTube. For those of you joining us on YouTube, please place your questions in the YouTube chat, and we'll be monitoring that. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can get to. Okay, good. Sir.
Dr. Carter, I'm Ray Grant, and I grew up in Yonkers, not too far north of the Bronx.
Nope.
And I'd be interested in your thoughts on the relationship between poverty and fear. When I grew up in the 1960s and 1970s, and the Alexander Smith carpet factory closed, it seems to me that fear generated so many people from moving out of the neighborhood, even though poverty hasn't yet struck that neighborhood. And then, if I may, a second part of the question, you mentioned a lot about the role of the arts. This community has a remarkable history of the arts. Could you talk about a bit the role of the arts in economic development?
Oh, sure. So just so that I'm clear, before you give I just want to ask a clarifying question. So you're saying that where you were in Yonkers as a kid, folks still stayed?
Folks still stayed until the fear of the factory closing began to drive them out, even before poverty leveraged itself in the area.
Right. So they moved because they saw the writing on the wall that jobs were going to associate with being
Precisely.
Got it. Okay.
Precisely.
Just wanted to make sure that I was clear about that. Yeah, because the fear that I actually thought you were talking about to start was, what I've heard, especially now, and I think that the pandemic's kind of like, raised it to in some places to sort of, fever pitch levels. But, I think, it's just like in Chicago, like, for example, where the violence really is, people haven't seen anything quite like it in a while. But I think it is sort of some cases happening around. But again, but as far as like what you were talking about, sir, having when people see it, like, yeah, there will go. If they don't see the possibility, that is fear. That is a total motivator. I think on both sides it actually is. It's the same kind of thing. If people don't see, the possibility of things moving, then you do. Unfortunately, it's that simple. And, but I think my approach or to anybody is that, there are cycles, and even, as that place closed down, it's not like, like when the predatory speculators, find my phone number, or send me solicitations, or anybody in those communities, is because they know things are changing. And unfortunately, that people in those communities often don't see that, because they're just focused on like literally what's right in front. And so, and I'm not, and that's not me throwing shade at all. It's like, I get that. But as we continue to like think about, as the population grows and, just changes in every way that it's going to, we do have to be thinking like, how can we, create the kind of communities that we desire, that fulfill us in many different ways right where we are. Because we know ultimately that low status communities, if you just want to be like, like serious about it, they cost more. Taxpayers, they do. So it's like, why are we like not creating opportunities for all of our communities to grow and prosper? And I think that, comes from often the history of the country, where it's just like poverty is criminalized in so many cases, and then you add race on top of that, that makes it even worse. And the arts thing is really, people like being around beautiful things. Artists, are, I think, can be a great business. And so, of course, we need to incorporate their work, into the planning for our communities, just to share that culture. And but again, how do we do that? And if you just have to be mindful about looking for ways to practice that, and to give them opportunities to practice.
Thank you. Kylie.
So you specifically touched on how it's important that people understand the value of the land that they own in their communities. Yeah. And when they own their homes, it's really important to understand the value of that so that they aren't the victim of predatory buyers. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of low-status communities in the U.S. Were the victim of policies that stopped people from owning within their own communities. So what do you think the best steps are for communities themselves to address that fact in order to build wealth, and for governments to address that fact?
Oh, yeah. Well, some of the things, I mentioned, is like knowing that those were systemic, issues that we're still dealing with right now, right? So one is, I think the first thing is to stop the bleeding, because in low status communities, what we're seeing is not often people they're selling because they don't believe that there's value in those communities. Like I know in my neighborhood alone, like our home ownership rate just over the past 20 years went from more than 20-some% down to 7, less than 7. And people weren't getting the houses taken from them. They were selling, often for less than what they were worth, to predatory speculators, because the predatory speculators would convince them that their house wasn't worth much and that they were doing them a favor by taking it off their hands. That is chronic all over this country. And so first we have to do that. And the second thing is, that's I really do think that the same way that those kind of codes were literally written into law. Like, no, you can't sell to a black family or a family of color here, removing those kind of things, which are still in different places around the country. They're still in statutes, which is so crazy to me. But now it's like I think legislatively, we do need to do some things like that. If we actually did go to, I think especially like the big private equity firms, who are literally, they're buying homes as holding companies in those communities and making it more difficult for other people to buy. Or, if the Security and Exchange Commission actually did say, what, low-income homeowners are a protected class. And no, you can't just, go walk up and just like do that, because once a deal is registered, or before it gets registered, again, having some kind of financial and legal counsel to make people to have them understand, because that's the thing. People don't sell because they sell because they don't think it's worth anything. And that predatory speculator is not going to tell them that it is, or what their plans are. So again, that's the education that I think we do really need to share. And then, in support of people keeping what they have, because we're still liquidating it. And is also what's getting into the lack of generational wealth and increasing, the wealth gap in this country. So first, let's keep what we got, because some of us still have. Like, unfortunately, my own family, the house that I grew up in, none of my siblings wanted to keep the family house. Not one. And there were 10 of us. And I could not convince anybody to keep it, because they were like, that's cute, you do that community thing, but we out. Yeah, and the things we don't talk about, that house is now worth 3 times what it was sold for. And and I don't have any children, but they do. And I'm like, you could have passed that down to your kids. I just have dogs, so it makes it easy. They don't care. But anyway, I'll pass down what I have to their kids too, it's fine. So it's all good.
Do you have? Okay, let's go over here again, please.
Hi, really great talk. And I do want to point out what I'd call what you're talking about is a repositioning, because there's a lot of other great work in revitalization. This white guy lived in DC for 32 years, and we get those contacts multiple times a week about selling our house in DC. And kind of like the story you mentioned, the call I took a couple days ago, because I like to F with the people, is
Oh, we should
I
talk.
said,
I bet we have
I
fun.
said I said, well, I think I said $1 million, but I might have said 750. And the house is worth that much if we put 150 into fixing it up. And he says, well, subject to condition. And I said, no, as is. And of course I hung up the phone because I wasn't really interested. But one thing I do want to say, it's a tragedy, the story you recounted about not getting the development deal. In my experience working in the hood was governments are very risk averse and uncreative. And it's very difficult to get them. And so there's one thing I found in your presentation, I would say is uncreative too. Public housing, what if we added the amenities to it that's in private housing? What if hospitals had rec centers and DIY, self-help stuff? And I've written tons of these proposals in DC, uniformly rejected. You could do an awesome pharmacy community center too. So I'm just saying that we have to seize every opportunity we can. And even there are plenty of nice neighborhoods with hospitals, including just down the street. The area around the hospital sucks even in high income areas because they're not built to leverage community. But again, I just want to say, totally awesome. I'm going to get your book.
Thank you. No, and that's the point. I mean, you could do all of those things, and there's no reason why. It's just that this is how it's supposed to be, and that's what they do. And risk averse is, I know. I feel your pain. So that's okay. We'll be there.
Majora, we have an online question.
Okay.
So, Paul Michael.
So I'm going to be asking a question on behalf of Derek and Charity Jensen. They ask, have the redevelopment projects you've implemented triggered any displacement as a result of gentrification? Do you have any advice for how to avoid displacement issues on these redevelopment projects?
That's such a good question and a really hard and awful one because, there's displacement even now in low status communities, mostly by other poor folks because there's almost always like a crazy churn. But that's the thing that I like to think about and how when I'm focusing on development is that, the gentrification is the result of a rapid reurbanization. That's the population growth that we're experiencing and the fact that folks like baby boomers as well as, millennials kind of want the same kind of space, that's often in urban areas, and those are the places that developers have eyeballed, as the places that are near transit, could be developed into all sorts of cool stuff, and then that's when it happens. So part of the issue is that, we're definitely not creating enough supply to meet the demand. And that is something that almost nobody ever talks about. And, especially, many of our politicians and even some activists who will absolutely resist density. And I'm just like, that. So we have to deal with that. And the fact that, again, the kind of policies, that we were talking about before don't always support the people that are in those communities. Right, to stay there and to build. So we've got this like ridiculous double-edged sword. And so I think it's what if we're really going to be mindful about how do we create the kind of communities that really can, speak to the promise of what America can be, then we have to realistically look at the fact that that reurbanization is happening, density is being rebuffed. And then how do we also create more opportunities for people to actually build and stay in their own communities? And so like some of the examples that I use in my book are things about, how folks are doing that, on the ground, like in East Oakland in particular, excuse me, they'd like kill me if I said that, West Oakland in California, there is what's called the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. Like some of those folks who are actually they've already bought now a major, part of the neighborhood where they're doing a permanently affordable real estate development project specifically for the resident owners that buy into it. And, and it's just like, and there's some market rate, pieces in there, and then not market rate at all, and art spaces and community development, but then again, they're doing that on their own. So, and again, I don't think that it's like a magic bullet, talent retention, but I do think that, there are folks out there who see the value in creating and doing development from the inside out. So that there's an admission, an open admission that our neighborhoods are going to change. They are going to become more populated. And I think on some level they probably should. But the question is how and when we do that development, who's involved in the design, and and whose needs are actually being addressed, and can we use it to build generational wealth? Those are really more the questions that I actually think we need to be, really digging into when we're thinking site by site about development.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for just one or two more. Kylie, do you have another one on your side?
That was a very interesting talk. I also was born and raised in the Bronx and went to Bronx Science.
No way.
Had a
It
generation
always
before
happens.
you.
Wow. I swear, no matter where I go, like in the world, there's somebody from the Bronx there. It's true.
I'd like your thoughts on, I grew up, like I said, but I left the Bronx as soon as I could. And in the 50 years watching from afar, I've seen other neighborhoods like Bedford-Stuyvesant and Central Harlem and Sunset Park and the Alphabet Cities, Alphabet Avenues, all rise up and change, whereas the South Bronx has not seemed to do that, at least not to the same degree. And I was wondering, I mean, you're closer to it than I am. What is the difference between those neighborhoods? Why have some developed and others not?
Well, see, I look at those neighborhoods as cautionary tales because they are not all parts of all those neighborhoods, but most of them, have literally taken the gentrification and displacement path. So I don't necessarily look at that as a success, to tell you the truth. Yes, I mean, some of the, there's some wonderful things that are happening there that are super cool to be in. But ultimately, there has been, I think, a churn, of many of the folks in the communities that were able to buy into them, in particular after white flight, were unable to actually fully participate in the change. So I am, the talent retention strategy is something that's, it's sort of like in the middle, of like maintaining poverty. And it's interesting because in the South Bronx, believe me, there's a part of it, like I live in the southeast part of the Bronx, where I think we have more government and nonprofit industrial complex sort of like, issues that really are like, this is where it should stay poor. Whereas on the other side, like the Mott Haven and Port Morris part, where you would be astonished, at the level of all market rate housing that's being built up there. So it's happening unevenly, and again, none of them, that either one of those two types of development that we see happening, I feel are just not as healthy, and when it comes down to creating the kind of, communities where people feel as though they get their needs and their aspirations, met in some way. And I feel like real estate development could be used as a transformational tool, but it's not. It's so limited, I find, in so many ways.
So I think we have time for maybe two more, and we have one in person. We'll do the one here, and we've got one online. So why don't we go here first?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so happy that I was able to attend and listen to you. It's been super inspirational. And as a fellow woman of color, I wanted to ask you, what tips and resources would you share for someone like me who wants to do something similar for her community?
Well, first of all, amen. Really, it just makes me super happy. And the thing is, well, there's one thing. First of all, it'll be the ride of your life. It will be. I mean, there are moments when I'm just like, this is so cool when you see people actually enjoying the fruits of your labor. It's like, this is the most awesome thing in the world. And then when that happens, because then you forget like all the crazy crap that you had to deal with in order to get there. So basically, honestly, the thing I tell you is like really take care of yourself, because I didn't for a number of years. I feel great now, but I had just literally put myself in the hospital twice because I wasn't taking care of me. And and for people who do this kind of work, it's like you will become everybody's mother, on everybody's like a confidant in the worst way, and and everybody's hero and everybody's like, enemy. And you just keep your spiritual practice like whole and healthy and know why you're doing what you do, and you'll be fine. My pleasure.
Thank you. And the last question is from YouTube.
Okay, I'm going to be asking a question on behalf of Clarissa. She asks, what do we do when land speculation drives even the most rundown commercial and residential properties financially out of reach?
I know. That's where, and I feel like that's where like the philanthropic community can actually like step in. Like because it's all speculation. And I look at some of the stuff and I'm like, I look at like a house that I squatted like back in the 90s. And I'm just like, it is not worth that. But it's because of the speculation that happens. And so we know that kind of stuff is crazy. So again, I do think that ultimately, like a real issue is going to be, it is going to be some legislation, whether it's through the SEC, like, creating, the low-income homeowners as protected classes, and so that more people don't sell as early and as cheaply as they do. But the other, I think that's going to be a big piece of it. Like, how do we handle that? And the other folks is just kind of hold on and wait, because I don't think right now there's anything we can do about that, but cycles go in and out. And then the next cycle, people need to stay in. And then not when the next time it goes around, don't sell so quickly. That's all. I really think that it's just like the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So we just have to do it and hold on and wait.
Majora Carter, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So friends, I've got some good news for you. And that good news is this is not your only last opportunity to ask Ms. Carter questions. So we're having a community breakfast tomorrow here at the museum from 8 to 9:30, and you're all invited. So please drop by anytime between 8 and 9:30 a.m. I think it'll be upstairs in the Swanner Forum on the 5th floor. Come in the front door as you normally would. We're not open yet, but they're going to be ready for you. Come on up, you can have a little bite to eat, and you can interact with Majora. So please join us for that. So once again, I'd like to thank our founding underwriter, the R. Harold Burton Foundation, our underwriter, the Cultural Vision Fund, our gold sponsors, Rio Tinto Kennecott and M. Lazy M Foundation, our silver sponsors, the 9990 Group and Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, the DiFiore Family Foundation, Paula Swanner Sargetakis and Joseph Sargetakis of Frog Bench Farms, Andrea and Paul Matlin, the Nature Conservancy, and the Wolf Clark Foundation. You absolutely can.
Something stupid that I shouldn't have said, or that I should have added something to something I said, which was, so I hope, Clarissa, if you're still on the line, because even if it does seem out of reach and it seems crazy, but if you can afford it, even if you're eating oatmeal and, beans for a while, buy property. Really, especially folks from low status communities, you have to do it. It is, if you can do it, do it. That's so, I'm sorry. I should have said that before.
Thanks, Majora. I'd also like to thank again our community partners of the County Library and Viridian Event Center at Kingsbury Hall and Liberty Heights Fresh, as well as you, the voters of Salt Lake County, for supporting the Zoo Arts and Parks Fund for institutional support. So please, again, join us online April 14th for our evening with Bren Smith. And as we bid you this good evening, remind you about our special exhibit from New York City, the American Museum of Natural History, The Nature of Color, which is now open. It will be open until August 14th, and it's free with your regular admission to the museum. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here. Have a good evening. Safe driving.